The reason you clicked on this video suggests that either you are considering to get a Steam Deck OLED or are looking to upgrade from the Steam Deck LCD to the Steam Deck OLED. You see, the Steam Deck originally released on February 25th, 2022, and with the success of the original Steam Deck, Valve decided to enhance the Steam Deck gaming experience by creating the Steam Deck OLED. So with the Steam Deck OLED now 2 years old, I want to reflect on number 1, why I got a Steam Deck OLED, and number 2, why I love the Steam Deck OLED. And hopefully, by watching this video, it will give you a better glimpse as to whether or not the Steam Deck OLED is for you or not. Let's check it out. So when the Steam Deck got released back in February 2025, it felt really special to me because for me, getting a Steam Deck was much more than just getting a PC handheld gadget. To me, it was the first time that I stepped my foot into the PC gaming community as a whole. And as far as the Steam Deck goes, I loved it from the start. I loved the ability to play all sorts of games, got to experience a lot of classical gems as well as newer AA and some AAA games. It was something in which I found really satisfying as a gamer and whatnot. Now, when the Steam Deck OLED got released in November 2023, I was also really excited to want to pick it up. However, I also had a bit of doubts as to whether or not I should pick it up or not. Now, let me start out with why I really wanted to pick it up. So the main reason is that as somebody who has been a gamer for the longest time, one of the things that I loved about gaming is I loved electronics. I love having the opportunity to experience a lot of different gaming gadgets, gaming handheld consoles, as well as home consoles and whatnot. And when I say about me wanting to experience new consoles, it was not always just when a new generation was birthed. No, I also loved to keep track of various models of specific consoles. Like for example, it's very often where, consoles, when they release a original version, they will later on have some iteration like a slim model. And if that interests me, I would also pick up the slim model as well. Like for example, back in the day, I have the PS3 Fat, but then when the PS3 Slim came out, I was also interested in it and I picked it up. And same thing with the PS4, I had the original PS4 and then I later on upgraded to the PS4 Pro, even though I did not have a 4K television right away. I just wanted something new to experience. And same thing with the Nintendo Switch. Had a Nintendo Switch since day one, and then I picked up the Nintendo Switch OLED later on. I am just somebody who just loves tech, loves electronics, and always loves to experience new devices and whatnot, no matter if it is a big or small improvement from the previous version. And so when the Steam Deck OLED came out, it just made me really excited. I really wanted to try PC gaming on a handheld using an OLED display. It was just something in which I was really interested in because keep in mind, I was somebody who also owned the Nintendo Switch OLED and I fell in love with the display. I love the OLED screen, how bright it is, how there are vibrant colors as well as amazing contrast. So I wanted to experience PC gaming on an OLED display, and what better way to do that is to pick up a Steam Deck OLED. However, like I said, I had a bit of a hesitation, and my main hesitation with getting a Steam Deck OLED is the lack of creative design. Because as somebody who owned a Steam Deck LCD already, the Steam Deck OLED just felt like buying the same device over again. The Steam Deck OLED pretty much looks the same as a Steam Deck LCD. Sure, there are some minor key differences. I'm not going to go into detail as I have an actual video showcasing both the Steam Deck LCD as well as the Steam Deck OLED and comparing them both. Feel free to check that out. But basically, the Steam Deck OLED and the Steam Deck LCD, unless you own both devices, it is very hard as an outsider to tell the difference between those two. The button layouts, the trackpads, everything, including the size, were all identical from the outward. And that was something that really gave me a hesitance because even though I do love having the ability to experience new consoles in the past with their improvements and whatnot, but another incentive that I had with getting a new console was the experience of actually using a new model. The looks, the shapes, and all that just feels quite a bit different, and that was something in which that gave me also another incentive in the past to purchase another model. It just had a different look and feel as well. And so I held off with getting the Steam Deck OLED for a bit, but then it still really bothered me for not having the ability to play PC games with an OLED screen. So I ended up just pulling the trigger and bought this, which is the Steam Deck OLED. And boy, I was really happy that I did. Now that I shared about my process into getting the Steam Deck OLED, I really want to talk about what I love about the Steam Deck OLED. So as soon as I opened up the Steam Deck OLED, I knew I made the right choice. As I started holding the Steam Deck OLED, I noticed that it was definitely lighter than the Steam Deck LCD. And even though on paper it did not look like a major difference, but to me, having it a bit lighter, it really made me feel much comfortable in longer gameplay sessions. Because when I used the Steam Deck LCD, there were times in which my arms felt a bit sore for holding it too long. But with the Steam Deck OLED, it felt like the weight was just about right. It felt a bit more comfortable and whatnot. The Steam Deck LCD, there were times in which I played a bit too long and I had to just bring out a pillow to have my hands rest on there while I continue gameplay. But as far as the Steam Deck OLED goes, I could just play it anywhere at any time, even without a pillow or even just sitting on my couch or chair. I could still enjoy playing the Steam Deck OLED for 2 hours and still not feel any sort of strain and whatnot. Again, not a make or break, but it is something in which I'm also grateful for as getting a Steam Deck OLED. Now, as far as me turning on the screen, playing the games, I also was amazed at a few things. So, as far as the screen size goes, the screen size in itself is the same size as the Steam Deck LCD. However, the play area of the screen is what makes the difference between a Steam Deck OLED display as well as a Steam Deck LCD display. Let me explain this. As far as the Steam Deck LCD goes, there's a 7-inch play area. However, with the Steam Deck OLED, there's a 7.4-inch area of gameplay. And that is something in which I never thought it was a big difference until me actually sitting down and playing the Steam Deck OLED. It really made me feel that games were a bit more immersive and more pleasing to my eyes. Now, as far as the OLED screen goes, the OLED screen on the Steam Deck really makes the colors pop in the games. The colors feel a lot more vibrant, and I just love as well true deeper blacks as well as bigger color contrast. It is just something that enhances my gameplay experience on the Steam Deck OLED. Now, as far as battery life goes, I'm also grateful to be able to experience the Steam Deck OLED because Valve did a great job to improve the battery life, okay? What I find is that there are games which normally run for 2 hours unplugged on the Steam Deck LCD ends up running 3 hours on the Steam Deck OLED with the same settings. And then games that run only 90 minutes on the Steam Deck LCD ends up running 2 hours and sometimes a bit more on the Steam Deck OLED. Like for example, with The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, okay, when I play it on the Steam Deck LCD locked at 30 frames per second, I only get about 2 hours of gameplay, which is not bad in my opinion. However, with the Steam Deck OLED, playing The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt locked at 30 frames per second, I was able to run it for 3 hours. Now, as far as Spider-Man Miles Morales goes, on the Steam Deck LCD, I was only able to run it for, I think, about 90 minutes before having to recharge. However, on the Steam Deck OLED, I was able to run it for like a little over 2 hours before having to recharge. So that is just something that I find really, really awesome. Even though I'm somebody who mostly play my Steam Deck indoors, in which I have access to an outlet and whatnot, but it's always assuring to not have to rely on an outlet at all times. Now, another thing in which I love about the Steam Deck OLED is having the ability to play some games smoother. As far as the Steam Deck LCD goes, it features only a 60Hz refresh rate display. However, the Steam Deck OLED features a 90Hz refresh rate display. And though I'm not too picky on the performance of games, it doesn't hurt, in my opinion, to have the ability to play games smoother if having the ability to do so. As far as me playing Hades on the Steam Deck OLED, playing it at 90 frames per second and at 90 Hz felt a lot more smoother than playing it on the Steam Deck LCD at 60 frames per second and at 60 Hz. Same thing with Hollow Knight. It felt smoother when playing it on the Steam Deck OLED due to having the ability to play it at 90 Hz refresh rate and at 90 frames per second, as opposed to the Steam Deck LCD only at 60 frames per second and at 60 Hz. Now, one last thing in which I love about the Steam Deck OLED is having the ability to reuse the same accessories for the most part in which the Steam Deck LCD also uses. Because like I said, with the Steam Deck OLED and the Steam Deck LCD, they have the exact same dimensions. So for the most part, accessories that work on the Steam Deck LCD, 99% also work on the Steam Deck OLED. Like the screen protectors, the case, the outer shells, usually all fit on both hardwares. Now you may be wondering, Joe, why do you say that only 99% of accessories work on both the Steam Deck OLED as well as the Steam Deck LCD? If they are the same dimensions and whatnot, isn't it 100%? What is the 1% scenario in which the accessories could only fit on one of the handhelds? And my answer to that is that even though overall, like I said, that the Steam Deck OLED and the Steam Deck LCD, as far as the layout, the dimensions and whatnot, they are all identical. But as I mentioned before, the Steam Deck LCD has a screen that only has a play area of 7 inch, whereas the Steam Deck OLED has a play area of 7.4 inch. And so what I'm saying is that what I noticed is that some full house shells, what I mean by full house shells, it means that the entire Steam Deck, except the ventilation ports or the trackpads or the screen, everything else is all covered tightly with the shell. For those shells, you really have to watch out, especially those that are a tight fit, because some of them, what I find when I picked up the Steam Deck OLED is that some of the shells, they cover part of the screen and just make it where only the 7-inch display on the Steam Deck LCD will be exposed. And that is a big problem for Steam Deck OLED owners, because when you play a game in which only 7-inch of the screen is exposed, there will be some tiny areas that get cut off due to the case covering that aspect of it. So what my advice is that if you are getting a Steam Deck OLED, make sure when you are getting the accessories to read carefully the description. Make sure that they say that it is compatible with the Steam Deck OLED, and then also make sure to read any necessary reviews about people that actually use the accessory for the Steam Deck OLED and what they feel about it. Is it a great experience or not? That is something in which I would say to definitely check and pay attention to, because you don't want to buy something in which you have to return. Now that I shared about what I love about the Steam Deck OLED, I want to transition into talking about whether or not I think the Steam Deck OLED is worth it for you or not. I will be sharing both perspectives. I'm going to share about whether or not I think you should get a Steam Deck OLED if you have not had a Steam Deck already, as well as talk about whether or not you should upgrade to the Steam Deck OLED if you have a Steam Deck LCD already. So as far as the Steam Deck OLED goes, if you do not have a Steam Deck and you don't mind spending a bit more cash, and you also love the layout of the Steam Deck and whatnot, you love having 2 big trackpads, you love having 4 back buttons and whatnot in which you can customize, then I would say definitely go with the Steam Deck OLED. You will not regret it. You will have the best experience on a first-party Valve hardware at the moment. Now, if you are somebody who already has a Steam Deck LCD, should you upgrade to the Steam Deck OLED? It really depends on how picky you are with the performance, the battery life in games, as well as, the display and whatnot. If you are used to LCD screens and you don't have a problem with it, you think that it is already gorgeous enough, and you don't mind having the latest and greatest, hardware in which you also mostly play older indies and AA games, then I would say the Steam Deck LCD may be something to just hold on for a bit longer. You might as well just save money and just continue using the Steam Deck LCD. So yeah, these are just my 2 cents. It's just amazing how Valve released the Steam Deck LCD back in 2020 2022 and quickly followed up with the improved version, the Steam Deck OLED, in late 2023. It's just great to see that Valve really invests in making the gaming experience for handheld enthusiasts to be really fun and really satisfying. But I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think about the Steam Deck OLED? Do you have a Steam Deck OLED? Are you considering to pick up a Steam Deck OLED? What is your reason in which you want to pick up a Steam Deck OLED? We'd love to discuss in the comment section below. And as always, if you love gaming discussions, gaming lists, gaming reviews, and everything related to the Steam Deck and potentially other topics that are interesting in the gaming community, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you really love this video, please hype this video. I try to post Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Pacific time and occasionally on Fridays, so stay tuned. Once again, my name is Joe Wang for the Nomadic Gaming Guild, and game on!